Greetings and salutations. My name is James Eldon, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight, in which each episode we feature a new playwright to talk about the tricks of the trades and the obstacles that we all experience as writers. My guest today is a graduate of the Canadian Film Centre's feature writing program and UBC's creative writing MFA program. She writes for stage, film, and television, and her work explores the career experience through history and genre. She has had plays produced in Toronto, Vancouver, and Los Angeles, and her award-winning short films have screened internationally. She wrote on 2 seasons of CBC's Baroness sketch show and currently has 2 projects in development. She also teaches screenwriting and co-hosts the crime fiction reading series Noir The Bar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hope Thompson. How are you?
Great. Thank you for that introduction.
It's been 8 years?
It has been a while, yeah.
So let's talk about this. I want to talk about Outside Job, because that's what we produced.
Yeah.
And then it went through some changes and became something else.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we really give anything away. I don't know if there's a spoiler. Yeah, there's a little bit of a spoiler, but let's talk about what the premise of what Outside Job is, just for our viewers and listeners. And then we'll go into, all that goodness that goes along with it and those changes that you made and the reasons behind it and how that developed.
Sure. It's a classic, it's a classic closed circle of suspects type of sort of crime mystery story, in also a classic setting, an old mansion. So you have a group of people who are gathered together, sequestered in a room because there has been a crime on the premises and they can't leave. And they're waiting for the detective to interview them. So that's the setup.
Can we talk about the crime?
We can talk about the crime.
Can we reveal what it is without giving anything away?
Yeah, the host of the weekend party, it's kind of a sort of an Agatha Christie type thing almost, but a little bit darker and more noirish. But it's the host of this weekend gathering has been found murdered. And so the group of sequestered guests, the murderer is among them. So it's sort of this works well for whodunit, but sort of designed to work well for theater because everyone is gathered on stage and it's a very talky heavy piece. Short piece.
Okay, so how long until, because we produced that in 2013 as part of our Play Noir series. Mm-hmm. How long until you restaged it did it become stiff, and what changes did it undergo and why?
I worked on it. That was, about a year later, it was performed at Buddies in Bad Times Theatre in Toronto. And that's the North America's largest queer theatre. And it was staged there. And we decided to make that title name because it's both a little bit sexual and a bit funny. And also it puts the title on the dead body, and because it's sort of the fulcrum around which the whole narrative swings. Now, having said that, I also did like Outside Job very much too, because that is mentioned in the play. So that's like the slightly more innocent title.
Besides go ahead.
Sorry. And you were asking other changes. There were actually not a lot of other changes. The staging was similar to what we did in the LA production. Mm-hmm. A few line changes here and there, but it was a pretty well established piece, I would say, because I had gone through some iterations of it before I sent it to you.
Okay. And then, I mean, this comes up in conversations in past episodes. Mm-hmm. When do you know you're done? Because I imagine you thought you were done when you submitted it, but then there were still some changes that were made. So when do you really decide to leave a piece alone?
Ideally, after I feel like it's ideally after there's been a production where you've gone through that back and forth with a director who's really involved in the piece, and they will, probe you and like say, what does this line mean? You know, what are you trying to say here? Maybe this could like a more of a dramaturgical approach. And I've had that with a few directors, and that's been really great because we've really fine-tuned the script and then started the rehearsals. So we've done a lot of back and forth, and then I feel like then I see it on its feet, and then I might make some minor tweaks after that. But then it for sure it's done because you've sort of seen it performed and you know that it's locked.
Well, let's talk about that then. Let's talk about letting the piece go without influence. And then let's talk about the aspect of having somebody pick it apart and really analyze it to kind of get more of your take, I guess is what I'm getting at. Which one do you have a preference, or do you like the surprise of not being involved and seeing what happens, or do you prefer to be involved in that process? And let's talk about both.
Well, I guess, yeah, I prefer to be involved if it affects the writing, like the actual writing and the lines. I definitely want to be involved. Like I don't want anyone changing lines
Right,
unless
absolutely, they
I'm involved in that. But I typically like to be at all the rehearsals too, to see how it develops, and not to be like, oh, we're looking over the director's shoulder, but just to be present. And partly it's to be there in case there's like, just to talk about subtext, in case there's misreadings about subtext, because that has happened a couple of times when I guess I haven't made it that clear in the writing, or it hasn't been interpreted exactly the way I imagined it. And I mean, you have to have room for how actors and directors interpret things, but like subtext is very important because you're really often acting the subtext. And yeah, you don't, I do like to be there, but at the times, there've been a couple times when I haven't been present at rehearsals, and can also be pleasantly surprised.
I mean, I'd like to think that the subtext that you wrote to me was pretty straightforward. I mean, I've revisited that piece so many times just because getting it, putting it printed in the 2013 publication, excuse me, and then putting it together in the anthology version as well. So, which is always a joy because I can always hear everything. I always hear those deliveries and those nuances that the actors get. But that being said, every time I've reread it, it's always been a little, to me, it was apparent. I don't think that there was any question in subtext. Now, that being said, are there differences between the versions, the one that you saw here in LA and the one there in Canada? And that's not a trick question or loaded question, whether or not ours was better or theirs was better or anything like that. I'm just curious from a playwriting point of view and seeing different iterations of it, how you felt and anything that you noticed that was missed or anything that and that's from on either side.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that because I was just so happy to see it performed in Los Angeles, like for so many different reasons. Sure. It's Los Angeles, it's the US, it's so exciting. Like it's just having someone else take your work and want to produce it. I love that interpretation of it. I thought the actors were great. I just really, really enjoyed it. Now, the one I had in Toronto here was with like people I knew. I was there for all the rehearsals. It was just a completely it was the same piece, and it was also great, but just for different reasons. I think I was pleasantly surprised in LA and just overjoyed, and in Toronto, it felt like another one of my plays being staged in a similar kind of way.
Sure.
And I was working with a director that I've worked with before, so it just felt like another chapter to the same story. in a sense.
Do you direct your own work at all? Have you ever directed? Do you
No,
prefer not to?
I have directed my film work, but not
Okay.
my theater work.
Any particular reason why? Just curious.
Yeah, I actually don't have a theater background. So I just, there's something very special about theater, and I just prefer to play this one role as playwright. I love the collaboration of working with directors. And again, that dramaturgical experience. And I don't feel that I need to direct as well. I want to work with other people.
No, it's great. It's always a kind of an opinion that I have for the most part, that even if we had, Play Noir was such a close-knit group and a lot of reoccurring people, and they'd become so involved one way or another just because they were, we had a lot of returning performers who decided they wanted to write a piece. And we always had a stipulation, was that if you do, and if it's selected, you can't direct it and you can't perform in it either. It's kind of like you're giving up, I don't want to say any creative license by any means, but it's just kind of like taking a step back and letting the chips fall where they may. I mean, that's my take, and I don't know if that's a right or wrong thing. So I know you're a fan of noir. So how do you approach that? Because noir is such a specific genre, and unfortunately it's a very underrated and just, it needs to be a little bit more beloved and revealed, for lack of a better word. How do you approach writing for such a specific genre such as noir?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I've been involved in sort of being obsessed by the genre for a long time. And it started with my film work, my short films. And I was so into the genre because of its like highly stylized, the gender roles were sort of like the femme fatale and the guys, and just so many qualities of it were very interesting to explore, to reverse, to play around with. Then so that's how it started with my film work. It was a very it was sort of exciting to get into noir, look at it from this queer perspective, try to unlock some of those stereotypes and change them up, and also to set stories in places like Toronto, where most things are set in New York or Hollywood, or New York or LA, and to change settings and just use noir to tell different types of stories. And so that was very interesting, and it just seemed a perfect genre for my work. And then I became interested in playwriting, and then sort of opened up the noir umbrella a bit. And I know it is specific, but I still think it's like part of crime fiction. And
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and then you can, like, Outside Job is not that noir, but it can be part of that world, I think, depending on how it's interpreted.
I would agree with that. I mean, we've discussed it in other episodes, and it's always an argument that goes back and forth for the longest time, is like whether or not noir is a genre to begin with, because there's no set rules, and there's certain movies that are out there that people will question whether or not it's noir. And, I mean, I think that you do have to go back to the basic vintage crime novels of the era to really pick that up. And I think, James M. Cain and Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, just to name a few. And I think those are important roots to go back to really get a grasp of the genre.
Yeah. Go back to like the classic noir, and then look at what are the tropes and situations that are representative of classic noir. But then going back there, I also go to Cornell Woolrich, who is sometimes called the grandfather of noir. And he, wrote the short story that Rear Window was based on.
Okay.
And then novels like I Married a Dead Man, The Bride Wore Black, and he is also was a writer in the dime store, like Black Mask magazine in the early days of noir.
Mhm.
And so he's also a closeted homosexual. So I'm really interested in him. He died in 1968, and I'm working on a project about him. So
Nice.
what's interesting about his work is he's very much noir, but not in the classic way of the other writers that you mentioned. Like he's more about entrapment, sense of doom, sense of paranoia. The main character is in a situation where there's no way out, and there may not be a femme fatale involved. It
Right.
could be that they've crossed the line and committed a crime, and there's they have no options. And so he really widens the storyline for me.
Are you a fan in that regard then of Patricia Hightower in that regard? Because it seems like she kind of tackles similar approaches to the genre that you do.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great reference. Yeah, I love her work, like the Ripley novels and her early short stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started out film and then kind of transitioned into playwriting.
Mhm.
How was that for you? Did you find obstacles in that regard going from screenwriting to playwriting? Opposed, like if you went the opposite direction, playwriting to screenwriting, do you think there would have been a difference?
Um, no, there weren't. It's actually started with. I think it started with Outside Job actually, because that was my first theater piece. Because it was going to be a screenplay, but because all the characters were in one room, it worked better as a play. So I decided to try it. Actually, sorry, I'm getting that wrong. There were a few plays before that were
Sure.
similar, that just had the idea of all the characters on stage.
Right.
And there was this theory called the green plays. There were two of those first. It is from a while back. But yeah, Outside Job was my third play. And there wasn't a huge transition. It was really thinking about stories that would work best in a stage setting, and then allowing yourself to just like free yourself up to lots of dialogue so it wasn't a big problem. And I've actually gone back into writing more for television and film now. And I've also always been involved in the theater scene in Toronto quite a bit.
Did you find playwriting limiting? Did you find that you were limited because of playwriting, or did you feel a little more free because you weren't confined to a format or structure that's very like formulaic, in that regard, as far as like film and television, like certain things have to happen by this time or something like that, like the 20, I don't know how it is in Canada as far as the 22-minute episodes or anything like that, whereas like you can kind of just write your story out in theater without having.
Yeah, I think that one of the great things about theater is there isn't all the the money involved. There's more of an opportunity just to explore ideas and stories without $1 million budgets, and so you can just take greater risks and put up plays more easily, write multiple works, have things produced faster if you're that lucky, and get a chance to just talk about ideas on stage, as opposed to like this process of finding money and finding investment. And it's everything is a little bit more guarded and careful with film projects because of what's at stake.
Do all of your plays revolve around taking a queer or genderless lens to whatever you're working on? Is that I don't want to necessarily call it your forte, and I think it's an important thing to in the time right now, but I'm just curious if that's really kind of your focus, to bring attention to these issues.
For the most part, yeah, there is. There's also a lot of comedy in my work too. So, and there can be comedy in noir, but it's yeah. There's usually gender issues in all my work, and that's another reason that I like, mystery, crime, noir, is that you can be presenting one thing and sort of like lulling your audience into expectations of one thing, and then reveal another type of story that they're not expecting. So that's like one of the great things about genre writing, I find.
Right. And so when you figure out whatever you're going to write, what's your process? How do you go through it? How do you start? Do you go for an outline? Do you start like, all right, I've got this idea, I'm just going to go and write linearly and try to figure out where it goes from there? Or do you have everything plotted out and written out, and then just like, okay, now that I know that this is where I'm going, how do I get there?
Yeah, sometimes it's the story kind of just flows out, but usually like in a scene or an idea, and then I like write out from there. But typically, because I was first trained in film, I like outline and then do a beat sheet, and then think of it in act structure and work it out a bit more carefully. And often I feel like even though they're plays, I'm thinking of them in terms of cinema, and like the logic of the acts and what people want and desire and what's driving the characters. And so I'm kind of carefully trying to build things up. But and then I'll go back and look at, that those first few lines that gave me the idea, and then those lines will likely appear somewhere in the play.
Okay. Are there obstacles that you encounter that you find yourself constantly trying to overcome? Like there are little pitfalls of like, gosh darn it, writer's block, or gosh darn this dialogue, or
sometimes it's just like trying to keep focused on things, and like I have been working on this one project about Cornell Woolrich for a while, and now it's sort of evolved into a film project from a theater project. I did write it originally for theater, and now it's evolved into a film project, and that's okay. It's still kind of working out the story, no matter what what medium it's in. It's still working out the story, but it's just sometimes I tend to like start new things in order to keep finding like energy and start new projects, when it's really just like a time management thing I think I'm trying to get at. And I've had a lot of time in the last year and a half. So I haven't been doing much. So I have got a lot of stuff done lately. But
well, let's talk about that then, because it's always an ongoing struggle. But a lot of people, either they don't set the time aside, they don't have inspiration. So how are you overcoming those situations yourself?
Well,
just to make yourself sit down and write, or to be creative, or to
yeah, I've got at the beginning in February of this past year, February 2021, I got an agent for my writing, and so that was like a major turning point for me. So that has really helped, like fear has helped me move forward faster. And so deadlines and, having someone have expectations about what you're producing, and the fact that someone could take that work and turn it into something, that has been hugely beneficial to making me have a kind of a mini renaissance. That's what I feel like I'm in right now.
Nice. Well, one, congratulations
Thank you.
on the representation, and I guess the mini renaissance as well. So, because a lot of listeners maybe finding themselves in a similar situation where they might be looking for representation. So, how did you go about that? What was the process in finding a rep to?
Yeah, I've looked at people over the years at some screenwriting people who represent screenwriters, and I've approached them, and for whatever reason, it hasn't worked out. But
when you say approach, how did that? Was that like in person, or like you happen to just meet them at a gathering, or or did you hunt them down via internet and say, hey, I know you represent this person. This is what I do. Talk about that. How you approach that.
Yeah, I got the list of some of the agents in Toronto and wrote them just cold letters asking, telling them what I'm doing and asking for representation. And I had some feedback, but I wasn't unable to land anything. And then pardon?
Did you send samples then?
No, I just one letter or email.
So so that's why, because when I hear feedback, I'm like, okay, so what was some of the feedback that you got? If you're just writing a cold letter of introduction, what was the feedback that you got in that regard?
That they're not taking any new people, maybe wanting to see a sample, and yeah, just at the stage that I was at, I guess, in my writing, that things didn't work out at that moment.
How many rejections did you get?
Let's say 4.
Okay. How were you with that? Did it start taking its toll after number 3, or when the 4th one came?
I was, a little bit depressed by it, but also you can get some distance without an agent. So I felt like just keep on going. And I'm also was working theater a lot at that time, so that didn't really matter in theater. In terms of agents, like in this world here, it didn't really matter for me at what I was doing. But to get into film and television, it is important.
Sure.
How I got this one is that I saw on Facebook that a friend of mine had just landed with an agent, and we did our MFA in creative writing together. And so I looked at his agency and just asked him if he would put in a word for me. And then I saw that not 1, but 2 people I knew were at that agency. So I tried to stack the deck for myself, and then it worked.
Good. Congrats.
Yeah.
Now, how does that work with deadlines and showing up? I mean, are you submitting things and then they're sending it back and say, okay, we like this, but tweak this? Talk about how that representation holds you accountable and any obstacles it might give you, as far as like, oh gosh, I thought it was good, and now I'm starting to question or I'm glad it's great and I'm glad you like it. What are the pros and the cons?
Well, yeah, it's really, I would say it's all pros. Everything just feels more professional because I'm producing log lines and one pagers for all my projects. Everything is organized. They're reading them. We have notes on the projects. We have meetings in the projects. I get feedback, and then I get all these pitch sessions. So I've had a chance to work on pitches to a lot of different broadcasters and executives. And so it's just been a great opportunity to like hone the projects and push them forward. But so the thing, when I would go back to like Cornell Woolrich, and it's taking me so long to write that, I can't, I have to really I can't not write it. Like you can't put anything off because there's so many deadlines now. It's very serious. It's not just like you driving your career, but other people have expectations about you as well.
Well, I think that and I think that's what makes sometimes playwriting so difficult if you're not in a situation where you're being held accountable. It's like it's hard to hold yourself accountable, because we'll do anything else but sit down to write.
Yes,
We'll do,
I'm still fall into that trap.
yeah.
Yeah.
I got to check my email again. Something else might have come through.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this Cornell piece going from originally going from stage, and then now you're going to screen. So was it going to be just a one-person show, or was it just about this person's life? And if it's biographical, talk about that. Talk about the research and how you were approaching that. Writing a play about somebody else's life. And
I went down to New York because all his papers are in the Columbia University Archive, and I looked through that, and I read a lot of his work, and there's only one biography on him, and I've read that, and I've just been trying to create this story that is sort of it's like he's trapped in his own world of his own making, and is sort of the premise, but his sexuality is revealed, and that's the thing that is making him feel trapped and doomed. So it's like Cornell Woolrich is trapped in his own Woolrichian world. And I do have a draft of the play done, and but we're interested in looking at it as a film piece now.
Sure.
And also developing it further. So, and I did a spin-off one woman piece that I performed myself at a theater in Toronto just before the pandemic started. And that was really interesting because I took a scene out of it, which is a seance scene when he lives with his mother, which he did live in real life. He lived with his mother for 25 years. And she has a seance, and in the script that I wrote, she has a seance, and so in the one woman show, I perform a seance on stage, and he comes down and from the other world, and we have a conversation. So it was fun to look at just one scene on stage, and also for me to act for the first time in my life on stage. That was
wow. I want to get into that real quick, but I want to go back just a second. So you're writing a biographical piece based on notes that you can discover from these papers and the biography. How much creative license are you taking with your conflicts, if you will? And are they based on actual things? Are you putting your own twist to those? And do you have to get clearance by some estate or anything?
Yeah, no, those are all good questions that I'm going to get to as I develop the piece further.
Okay.
Like I can't really get into that because I'm gonna wait to see how that is all gonna work out. It's mostly it's mostly fiction.
Okay.
It's only based on a few, but even if it's fiction, there are legal issues.
Sure.
So there was a movie that just came out about Celine Dion, and it's called Aileen. And so they changed the name, but everything, it's the same story, but to avoid those legal issues. But I don't really want to, I would like to have it.
Oh, absolutely. Really sure.
Be based on him. So it's mostly fiction because the things that I'm describing never happen. There's only the setup is true.
Got it.
And also the fact of his homosexuality is only one person ever mentions that, and that's like in the biography. His wife's sister mentions that. So it's like, and all the people in this world are all dead now. So it's like the secrets have gone to the grave.
Sure.
But it would be interesting. I think it's a really interesting piece, and yes. So hopefully all the legal aspects will work out in my favor.
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about this one woman show. How is that, and how, because it's a totally different animal, writing a one person piece. Now, are you just kind of, is it just a long monologue, or are you playing multiple characters and kind of interacting with yourself?
Yes, interacting with myself is the key expression. So it's this mask kind of theatrical form where you're like, hi, hello, what are you doing? So back and forth between myself and him.
Okay. And is that just for that scene, just for the seance scene, or is it through this whole?
Just for this whole one woman piece, which was honestly about half an hour long. It's a shorter piece. Yeah. Yeah. Seance and interview.
Okay.
And yeah.
So how do you approach that as a playwright writing a one person show, but with two characters?
Yeah, it was very, I just tried to be very open about it, because basically the piece was about me just laying bare my fascination with this guy. And we were comparing each other's life, how he was so successful. And really, so it was just like I was supposed to be interviewing him, but it was really an inspection of my life in comparison to him and the choices that he made, the choices that I made. He lived in a world where you had to be very careful around your sexuality. I live in the opposite kind of world, and yeah. I also wrote it quite quickly, and then we went through the series of rehearsals with the director, and the whole thing was within a performance festival. So it was like a bit of a big experiment, which was really great and really fun. And if I had had a lot of time to think about it, I probably wouldn't have done it. So it was good that it all happened fast.
Was it more of a workshop thing where you were constantly doing rewrites as you were going through and getting direction?
Yeah.
And just discovering things that may work or may not have worked. And what were those? What did you discover that was like, okay, I know not to do this, or I see how this works, or I see how this doesn't? What were the obstacles that you had to overcome in that regard?
Well,
and what did you learn?
There was this other thing happening, was that I'm not an actor. So it was, for the director, it was taking someone who's not an actor and putting them on stage and trying to make it work. Plus this double acting thing where you're playing two roles. So yeah, the challenge was to be as open as possible to the emotional part of the story. So that there'd be, because you're in the hands of professional actors, more could come out, but with just me doing it, I just had to like not hide as much as I would typically hide in my work, but to really lay. Were you
successful in that, in not hiding and
I feel that it was very well received. Yeah. Good. So, and yeah, all in all, yeah. And like you were saying about the lines, because you become so familiar with lines from, reading Outside Job and those two publications. Right. And you're, as an actor too, the lines stay in your head for a long time. And yeah, I found the whole experience of acting to be quite amazing, quite exhilarating.
Has it helped you in your writing at all? Do you find that you made improvements or made some discoveries, saying, okay, putting myself in an actor's position, has it helped?
Yeah, I always feel like as a writer, I always do try to do that. Like I always do try to read the lines and think about them as if they're being played. But yeah, it just gave me, like such great respect for actors. And also, okay, one thing that I found really interesting about it was when you're really, things are sort of working out, you have the moment that's sort of like a weird freedom, even though you've memorized everything and you're like in the zone. Like, not that I'm a great actor, but I did have this moment of freedom where I could almost like ad lib for a second, like in a gesture, something to gauge an audience reaction and get like a bigger laugh. Amazing.
So how does that, as a playwright, from a playwriting mentality, does it make you more defensive or a little bit more open with your writing? Like, okay, I can see how you could want to tweak this or do something different with this line that may not be what I intended, or are you still kind of a stickler? It's like, no, this is the way I wrote it.
You mean in terms of the actors having more freedom with the lines?
Yeah. Now that you kind of have that a little, I guess, appreciation for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, even when I've attended rehearsals and actors have wanted to change things, I mean, yeah, if it like makes sense to them and the flow of the words, and yes, definitely. And I did see that from firsthand experience in that role that I had. So yes, I can see not being quite so tight about the words, but the blueprint has to start somewhere. So the words have to be written, but I can see that they can be interpreted slightly differently and adjusted for sure.
You're the second person who's brought up a play as a blueprint. How specific are you in that blueprint as far as like, are you very detailed with everything that's there, or do you just kind of like give the basics and give,
Mm-hmm.
Is it more of a blueprint, or is this, or here's a foundation and stick with this?
Yeah, that's interesting. Even in film and in theater, I feel like it should be basic. Like, where it should not be basic is in the lines and in the drawing emotion, the story, like the true story, the true heart of the script. But in details like what people are wearing, what the background is about the location, the descriptive details, I feel like should be basic, but just have enough to quickly draw the picture in the reader's head, and not take away the set designer's job, the costume designer's job. Like, let them interpret the script as well. And I feel like sometimes when those details are too descriptive, they slow down the read. And then you're like fussing, your mind is fussing with details, and you're losing a bit of the story. That's just personal preference, because other times other people write almost in a prose way.
Right. What do you think the most important aspect of playwriting is? Whether that's story, plot, conflict, dialogue.
I would say conflict, and conflict and character, and finding the honesty in the characters, like in what the characters want, and being able to go there.
Expand
and to make the conflict as profound as possible, like to put the characters in as difficult a situation as possible, depending on the confines of the piece.
Can you be more specific in that regard, or give an example?
Well, in Outside Job, they are, to use that as an example, they are, they're in a situation that could result in one of them going to jail. So it could be a life-altering situation. And so as the moment of decision comes closer and closer, they are forced to be honest so there's some pressure in the situation. That, I think the conflict is quite good in that, because of the confines of the situation, and also the emotional conflicts going on among the group.
So is that an honesty with each other, or is that an honesty with themselves?
I think with themselves first, and then with each other.
Okay.
I mean, you're like working with people and emotions. I mean, it's so interesting, theater, and it's also part of the fact of it is like the fact that it's live on stage. Those characters, those people that are just like us, aren't removed by a screen, but are right there, performing. And I think it's just such a great medium.
So we can call that, I suppose we can call that raising the stakes, I guess, to, So was there a point when you were writing Outside Job where it's like, okay, oh wait, here's a great idea. This is how I'm going to, was there a stake raising moment that you kind of had an epiphany of? It was like, oh, I got to do this. This is going to be a great moment to kind of really build tension or to increase that conflict? Or was that just something that you had planned out? You didn't really have to, there was no aha moments. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was, because it's the closed circle of suspects, I was trying to find a group of people that had all these sort of fairly extreme differences, like the husband who's very weak and almost childlike versus the one who's dominating and full of secrets, and the childlike one is very open and honest. And so I feel like I sort of planned out who these characters would be. And another thing, writing a short play, I think you can have kind of fun putting together these little sort of jewels, if you will,
right,
in the short form. Whereas when you get into a longer form, things become more complicated and require more planning. But in a short form, there's some interesting, like little, it's almost like putting together a puzzle.
How about that long form then? How do you approach that? Obviously you said you find it more difficult, or?
I guess it's not quite as light. Like, you have to really get into it and think of it more like a feature. And I always go back to like my feature writing habits with a long form piece, breaking it down into acts and building character bios and sort of following more of that screenwriting logic.
Do you take that approach with your playwriting as well then?
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to separate it? Do you think it's beneficial to I don't want to say cross over. I mean, I know that you're going, no matter what aspect. Stephen Pressfield talks about it, not to drive his name into every episode of this we've done, but he talks about how, he was a copywriter for a while, and then he became either a journalist or nonfiction writer, and then he became a screenplay writer. And so all of those, no matter what aspect of writing he was doing, they all fed into the other. And do you find that that's the case for you? I mean, do you recommend it, or to delve into all different types of writing, or just kind of stick to your, stay in your lane?
I feel that they all sort of blend together a bit for me. Now, like, I haven't spent my whole life in theater, so if I was strictly in theater, I would probably be, I guess, experimenting more with different types of, but I've done more work in film and television. And so that's where I'm more focused now. And that's where I started. So everything. And then also this interest in noir is all about film. So it's like film has always been feeding, even through theater, into my work. And so it's sort of like my touchstone. I think the first book I read was the Sid Field, How to Write a Movie, I think, or Screenplay stuff.
Yeah. Which I think everybody's got a copy of, and whether or not they've gotten through the whole thing. Now, Noir at the Bar, I don't want to necessarily delve too deep into this, because it sounds like it might just be prose and fiction. Or do you implement theater as well into Noir at the Bar? What is this?
It's a reading series, and they're all over. Like, there's one in LA. They're all over the world, actually. Yeah. And I don't know who runs the one there, but the co-host of the one in Toronto was looking for another co-host, so I joined him in 2018. And yes, it is crime fiction writer, so it's all prose novel writing. So that's what all the readings are primarily, except for me. So I have read from 2 theater scripts, as well as my other stuff. I also write short stories and working on a novel. So
did you bring a cast in for that, or did you just read all the rules?
I did. I just read the parts myself.
I mean, are they open to that? I'm just curious for people that might be able to go and participate if they happen to have this in their particular city.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would ask for sure, because
Sure.
it's a very open community of crime writers, and it's called Noir The Bar. They tend towards the grittier, darker type of work, but we always like to keep the tent open so that we have like one cozy reading, one mystery reading, like a variety of different readings.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not all too dismal, too dark.
Well, can you go too dark in noir? I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing.
Yeah.
Where did you find your opportunity? Where do you find your opportunities for playwriting, if you're still participating in that regard? Or
yeah, I just wrote a piece that is sort of a diary piece. So it's a monologue that I want to perform, because I got that taste of performing. And so the issue with the theaters we're open for a bit, and I feel like now they're probably going to start to close. But I did go back to the theater for a series of readings a few weeks ago, and that was amazing to be back. So yeah, as soon as things open up again, I will try. Like, I'm sort of part of the theater community here in Toronto, so I'll try to read there. And yeah, like the places that I would usually send things haven't really had any calls, or things have been like affected profoundly by COVID. So waiting for that.
Are these just places you're already familiar with, or do you just not search them out? Like other opportunities, just kind of like stick to what you know.
These are, for this particular piece, there's 2 places in Toronto that I think would fit well. So those places, those theaters aren't really open to calls at the moment. But yeah, so just have to wait. Although I mean, I could look at other places, but I feel like the situation we're in is not going so well at the moment right now.
Sure.
So yeah. So I'm looking at actually trying to publish this piece first. So I have sent it out to a few things for publication.
All right. And how was that process? Was that just unsolicited submissions, or how did you seek out where you just decided to send them, and how did you approach that? And what does your cover letter look like? Is it long? Is it just a few blurbs and it's like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I got?
Yeah, I started with I have a writing group where I submitted it to, got some feedback, polished it a bit, and then I just looked for, I asked that group about some literary magazines, places where it could be sent to, and using that submittable portal, there's a host of different thematics and submission opportunities. So I sent it there, and then I ended up withdrawing it from all of them, because I found the perfect one that I wanted to actually send it to, and it gave me, and I also kept rewriting it. So I kept submitting it and then withdrawing it and rewriting it and digging deeper into it. And then I found the perfect spot for it, which is the Crime Writers of Canada's anthology. So I submitted it there, and hopefully it'll get in there.
What's your rewriting process? How's that work? How do you, again, it goes back to, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you're done with a piece?
Yeah, exactly. When I sent it to the writing group, I just wrote it for that meeting. And then I thought, oh, I love this piece. It's so great. And they're like, oh, it's really great. Just do a few things. And then I just sent it off. And then and then I just started to think about it more and more. And it's like, why are you ending it here? You're not pushing it deep enough. You're just riding on the fact that you think it's so great, but you haven't really gone anywhere with it. You haven't mined it yet. And it's like, yeah, so I had to take it out of those submissions and really look at what the concept was and take it as far as I could. And that was an excellent, it didn't matter about applying and withdrawing. It was actually great to do.
So you will actually pull a piece out for consideration, but what happens if they thought it was good enough as it was?
They hadn't got back to me yet. I mean, yeah, like it was, you know, do you know that submittable portal? Like if you just press submit, then you can just say withdrawal and you can just put it like it. Okay, it may seem like an odd thing to do, but for the piece it was necessary.
Sure.
And you are allowed to click on the withdrawal button. So
wait, what platform is this? Because I'm not familiar with this at all.
It's called submittable.com, and it is it's for like all the literary magazines, sci-fi, crime magazines, just to submit prose work.
Okay, so not necessarily plays or anything like that.
Pardon?
Not necessarily plays or anything like that.
I don't believe so, but it may be part of it, but I don't think so.
Okay, just want to if it is, I want to point people in that direction. If it's an opportunity for them to submit somewhere that they may not be aware of. What aspect of playwriting do you find the most difficult personally for you, that gives you the most trouble, if that's the right word? Where do you always find yourself getting stuck? Or maybe you've overcome it already, but like when you first started writing plays or anything like that, where do you?
I think pushing myself to be really truthful with the characters and
what does that mean?
Following their emotional arc, putting them into uncomfortable situations, like really finding the truth of the story and not just sliding over the surface. And I feel like that's what I used to do in some of my earlier work. And I'm trying as a writer to get closer to like emotional kind of honesty from the characters and the situations they're in, and not like shy away from that.
Can you expand on that and unpack that a little bit more, as far as like give an example of like what you may used to do, but what you did instead? I know that's really kind of specific and maybe a difficult question to, if you're not really in that position right now, but just want to know that I'm sure that there's people that go through that, or they hear the term, being honest, or, make sure that your characters are honest and being truthful, but I'm not quite sure. That might seem so abstract in terms without, knowing what that means.
One of my first plays was called Green, and it was a comedy, sort of a comedy of errors. And I think it worked very well and was quite popular. But I think like even in a comedy, you can rely so much on just the comedic flow of the piece, and it becomes strongest when the character, like maybe the comedy is pushed aside for a moment, and the characters, you really get at what they want, and maybe you reveal that in a deeper level. And I think it can be maybe a bit of a crutch or easy to just stay with the comedic flow to get in and out of the piece. Everyone just has a good laugh, but you didn't really get to any deeper emotional level. You didn't elicit any deeper emotion from your audience. So really good comedy would do both things.
And is that subtextual or is it just blatant?
I think it would probably be, yeah, that's a tricky question because I don't know if it has to be blatant.
Right.
If a character has to really say what they feel, but I think it should be clear to the audience.
Right.
And yeah, it goes back to making like the emotional honesty is between the playwright and the audience via their characters. And it can be easy to avoid the honesty as a playwright and just keep things going so everyone has like a nice time. But when you go there, I think you have a stronger piece.
Does that mean that there's no beginning, middle, and end? I'm not quite sure I grasp this, keeping this honesty or like extrapolating some more, just in keeping with this flow. This is safe. So what makes it unsafe, or what's delving deeper into that regard? That really,
well, starting with what the character wants, and why they want it, what is behind that want, what is their flaw, getting to the point where everything comes to a head in the third act climax, if we're following that structure, and getting to not being afraid to dig into the deeper parts of the character's desires. And yes, if it's like the Green Story was a very light comedy, and those things were touched on, but I thought in retrospect maybe they could have been touched on a bit more deeply.
Okay.
In a bit of a deeper way.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe not being entirely clear, but I feel like now in this short story that I submitted and withdrew, I was able to get to that. And that's why I think it's stronger now, because I spent more time with it and really inspected the story, the main character's story, and what they were really, the situation they were in and what they really wanted out of it.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten when it comes to playwriting? Or a lesson, or one of your favorite rules, or what do you always make sure you do when you're writing a piece?
Well, Norman Jewison, founder of the Canadian Film Centre, who wrote the great screen director, always says, just tell a good story. So as a basic rule, I always like that line, to just tell a good story and to tell it well.
What makes a good story?
The kind of story, personally, it's the kind of story that I would like to see.
What if there's no market for that?
Yeah, no, good point.
And I think we all have our subjective tastes, and I think, yeah. I don't know, maybe I don't want to go switch to Hollywood in this aspect, because I find that we've gotten away from that. I don't know if it's about the audience anymore. I don't think anybody wants to take chances, but so I don't know. I mean, I wish people would start making movies of what they'd want to see, and I like to think that would be the same thing with plays as well. So, yeah, not to pick on that question. I was just curious of just like more extrapolating from in aspects of what you want to see. Like give me an example in that regard. Like, what would you like to see more? What do you think that's lacking in theater right now?
Yeah, again, like it's a bit hard for me to say, because like I haven't been to theater
right
in a year. And I also live in a very theater-rich community here in Toronto, and there's so many great voices in theater now, and diverse voices, and I see so many, like, there's,
So do
yeah,
you
like theater is quite healthy, I would say, here in Toronto.
so do you find that those needs are being met finally, or you think those stories are finally being told, so it's not really lacking anymore, that there's been progress made in theater, and a lot of
Y-
stories are.
yes, I think so. I think so. I mean, if we just talk about story in general, there's so much out there right now with the because everyone's at home with all the streaming and how everything is so, everyone says, like, what are you watching, as a first question when you get together with people, and everything, story is being consumed at such a great rate now, and I think there's like just so much out there. But then still, as a writer, I'm drawn to certain stories, and that's the kind of work I want to see on the screen. And it's a work that lots of people want to see on the screen. I mean, like mystery, noir, things pieces that have a lot of style and genre, but reinvent the genre is like one of my favorite things.
Do you think there's a place for that on stage as well, not just on screen, that we could branch
Definitely.
out into
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What advice do you have for anybody who's starting out?
I would say to look for community, look for the theater community, storytelling community where you live, that's around you, because theater is such a wonderful community, and you can find your voice within that community and find your support network. And like for me, it was Buddies in Bad Times here in Toronto that is such like a mainstay of the city. And yeah, the people that I saw there 4 weeks ago when I went back for the first time in a year were people that I've been seeing there for like the last 20 years. And it's so incredible to be part of a community. And so I think writers, we spend so much time alone, but being part of a community, theater is a community. And so finding that community is the key thing, keeping you motivated and seeing your work on stage.
Do you find that the theater community is a little less cutthroat than like maybe the film and television industry? Or maybe it's not up there. I don't know. It seems like down here it is, but
I would say it's much less cutthroat, and it's more, it takes more risks. It's more, less conservative, more open to new ideas. And yeah, it's like we said before, there's so much financially at stake with film and television that you can experiment more in theater. And again, that's why it's a good place to work within your community, test out ideas, and you don't, it doesn't require much to put on a play. The founder of Buddies in Bad Times Theater, Sky Gilbert, it just like basically puts on plays on street corners, like with nothing. And that's how he started the theater. It grew from that. And so it's a great model. You don't need the big strappings of a big production.
I mean, I hope we don't go back to this by any means. I know that things are still kind of up in limbo. Do you find that there was a successful remote approach to theater through streaming? I don't know if you had a lot of that up in that area, as far as like, hey, look, we're stuck here, so let's do some performances via Zoom or Skype or anything like that. Did you see any hope for that, or any potential? I saw some things. I don't know if it really worked. I'm just curious
Yeah.
if by some other chance how do we perfect that? How do we make it work if we really didn't? Is there a
Yeah, that's tricky.
future,
I don't.
future in that regard?
Yeah, I don't think it does work that well. But there have been there's one group here that takes plays and translates them to radio plays, and I think that works quite well.
Did they do a visual aspect as well, where they kind of
just as a podcast?
Okay.
So it's pure audio, and so they'll take a well-received play up here and just translate it to radio.
Do they do that with Stiff or by
they
chance?
haven't? No.
That would have been nice.
Yeah, but I feel like that works because then you get the drama through the words, whereas when you're just filming the stage, there's something that kind of feels flat.
Sure.
And we're also used to having the camera move around and create the drama for us.
Right. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I see where it could go. I wanted it to. I wish there was some potential, but excuse me. I just don't see it. So what are you working on right now? Are you staying away from the stage? I mean, outside of this
yeah, right now I'm
monologue that you're working on?
Yeah, I've got the monologue, and I hope to be able to perform it at some point soon, if I can find a home for it. And I am working on a TV series, writing episodes for it, and then I have like a slate of other projects that are waiting for attention. So, including the Woolrich project. So. Yeah.
How much space do you give to a piece? Like when you take a break, do you find that you need to step away from something for a while? And how long does it take you to revisit that?
With the sort of speed I've been working at with this agent, I would say like a week or two has been a good break to switch from one thing to the other. And there's different aspects of the writing, like writing a one sheet, writing an outline, and things take different amounts of time. So you can drop in and check one thing off the box and then go on to a different project and get into it more deeply and then go back. But yes, I find going from one thing to another is good. And it's kind of like refueling a little bit.
Nice.
And taking time away.
Where can people find your stage work, your plays, if they wanted to give them a read and produce them?
Sure, at the Canadian Play Outlet. I can send you the link to that, and
that would be good. I'd love to include that in the show notes and the link below and stuff like that, so people can go and find that.
Great.
So, any other places or a website or anything where people can reach you or anything like that?
Yep. I have a website, hopethompson.net. And yeah.
Wonderful. All right. I hope it's been a treat. Give me 1 second. Let's say goodbye to these people. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. If there's any future playwrights that you'd like to see in upcoming episodes, please let us know. And Hope Thompson, thank you so much for being in the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, keep writing.